Under the electric haze of Orion Prime's entertainment district, that sprawling metropolis of shimmering neon and perpetual night, Carter Hayes walked with a purposeful stride. The city's air tasted of ozone, tinted with exotic spices drifting from open-air stalls, each one promising wonders from beyond the local star cluster. Tall skyscrapers loomed into the purple twilight, their glossy surfaces reflecting the riot of lights below. Hover cars hummed overhead, their underbellies flickering with advertisements for clubs, casinos, and high-tech arcades. It was a world of frantic pleasures, of excitement woven so deeply that the planet itself seemed to pulse in time with the roaring crowds. Carter's boots, once standard issue in the Earth Defense Corps, tapped steadily against the polished metal walkway. He was broad-shouldered, with short brown hair that lay neatly atop his head, and a face lined by faint scars, telltale remnants of a turbulent past. The war, which had ended half a decade ago, had left him restless, prone to midnight awakenings with sweat beading his temples, though he told no one of these lingering ghosts. He had long since traded the official uniform for civilian clothes, simple black trousers and a dark jacket tailored to hide the shape of a compact sidearm. He had become a gun for hire, though he preferred the polite term security consultant. The pay was decent, if not always stable, and it kept him away from the doldrums of a predictable life. That evening, Carter had been summoned to meet a certain Mr. Serrano in a private booth at the Nebula's Grace. The club was a famed hotspot, illuminated by enormous holographic dancers floating overhead, half real, half projection. The establishment catered to the wealthy and curious, its atmosphere thick with smoke from exotic plants, and its clientele decked in glittering outfits woven from cosmic silk. As Carter wove through the throng, he caught the sidelong glances of bouncers standing with arms folded across barrel chests, their eyes roving suspiciously over any new arrival. But Carter, with his practiced gait and composed demeanor, merely gave a curt nod, permitting himself entrance to the exclusive backrooms. His reputation preceded him. Inside, the Nebula's Grace was all velvet seats and silky curtains. Ambient music dripped from hidden speakers, soft melodies that stoked the imagination. Carter stepped through an arched doorway, passing beneath a carved relief depicting old mythic creatures from unknown worlds. A hostess in a tight, shimmering gown led him to a secluded alcove. There, behind translucent curtains that glowed with a soft, golden hue, Mr. Serrano waited. Serrano was lean, with pointed features and slicked-back hair the color of obsidian. He wore a suit of fine meshdale fabric, expensive by any standard, and drummed his long fingers on the tabletop as Carter approached. A single wave of the man's hand bid Carter to sit, which he did, his posture relaxed but ready, as though each muscle in his body was coiled in silent watchfulness. "Mr. Hayes," Serrano began, his voice smooth yet edged with a certain cunning, "you come highly recommended. They say you were once a soldier, an honorable one, before the war ended." Carter inclined his head. "I did my duty. Now, I do what I must to get by." "Yes," Serrano replied, his lips curving faintly. "And the job I have for you is one that demands both strength and discretion. Surely those traits fit you well, do they not?" Carter shrugged. "It depends on the price." Serrano's eyes gleamed. "Money is no object. You see, there is an engagement, a grand performance of sorts, that will soon take place aboard the luxury station Celestia Nova. The star performer is not from around here. She hails from a system far beyond human dominion. She is," he paused, selecting his words carefully, "unique. Her voice is said to enchant all who hear it, stirring emotions so deep they can hardly be put into words. Needless to say, certain individuals, and scrupulous ones, may seek to exploit her. I want you to ensure her safety during her stay. Your presence must be discreet, yet effective." Carter folded his arms, considering. "And the performer, who is she?" Serrano leaned forward. "Her name is Selara. You will meet her soon, but only after you accept the contract. Do we have a deal?" "Terms?" Carter asked bluntly. Serrano's smile turned razor-thin. 50,000 credits up front, another 50 upon safe completion of her performance run. Travel and accommodation included, plus a generous bonus if there are complications. Carter said nothing for a long moment, letting the silence stretch between them. At last, he nodded. "Fine, I'll do it. Where do I meet her? Serrano's posture relaxed a fraction. She is at the Grand Spire Hotel, top suite. The performance is in 3 days, so you have time to acquaint yourself with her needs and with the station's security detail. I trust you will not disappoint. With that, Serrano slid a small data chip across the table. Carter took it, glancing at the swirling logo of a stylized star on its surface. He pocketed the chip, then stood. Without another word, he left the alcove, weaving through the club's labyrinthine corridors until he emerged once more into the neon chaos of Orion Prime. His mind already churned with questions. Who was this Selara? And what manner of singer could fetch such exorbitant sums and so much interest from less savory circles? He had no answers yet, but Carter had a feeling that when he finally met this alien performer, his life would never be quite the same. The Grand Spire Hotel rose like a crystalline dagger into the sky, its reflective surfaces capturing the shifting colors of the city below. It was well past midnight when Carter arrived, the hush of the early hours settling over the vast lobby. An attendant, a short man with metallic implants glittering above his eyebrows, greeted Carter and escorted him to a private lift. The ride was smooth and silent, ascending to the penthouse suite that Serrano had mentioned. The doors slid open onto a hallway lined with deep red carpeting, its walls illuminated by soft lights. At the far end, 2 men in immaculate black suits stood guard. They saw Carter approach, and one pressed a panel on the door. It slid open, revealing a suite that seemed more like a palace. Plush sofas draped with shimmering cloth, windows that overlooked the city, and a faint, soothing melody emanating from somewhere deeper within the lavish chambers. Carter stepped inside. The guards said nothing, merely bowing their heads in silent acknowledgement of his arrival. With cautious footsteps, he moved toward the source of that gentle sound. It was like chimes in a distant breeze, softly echoing. He found Selara standing by a wide window, her gaze fixed on the city lights far below. She was tall, lithe, with a vaguely humanoid form. Her skin was a pale lavender, tinged with faint silver patterns that seemed to shift and sparkle when the light hit them just so. Her hair, if one could call it that, was a series of delicate filaments cascading down her shoulders, each filament glowing softly with its own internal luminescence. When she turned her face to Carter, he noted her large, opalescent eyes, fringed with thin lashes that shimmered like stardust. For a moment, he forgot himself. She was undeniably alien, yet there was a regal elegance to her, an otherworldly beauty that transcended the differences between their species. She offered a small, measured smile. "You must be Carter Hayes," she said, her voice softly accented, but fluent in galactic common. "Mr. Serrano told me you would be arriving to oversee my security." He inclined his head. "Yes, ma'am. I prefer to stay out of the way, but be near enough if you need me." She nodded, her filaments shifting slightly. "Then let me welcome you to my temporary home." Her gaze flicked to the city skyline. "Orion Prime is so very different from my world." Carter's eyes followed hers. "I'd imagine so. How do you find it?" Selara hesitated, then sighed. "Brilliant, loud, vibrant, yet tinged with a frantic energy that weighs on me sometimes. My people treasure serenity. We find solace in calm waters, in the silent glow of drifting nebulae. This city hums with life, which is inspiring, but also overwhelming." Carter nodded, absorbing her words. "Well, I'm here to ensure no harm comes to you, no matter how loud it gets." A fleeting smile curved her lips. "I'm grateful. I've heard rumors that there are those who would seek to harness my voice for questionable means." At that, Carter's expression tightened. "Serrano warned me about it, but I'd like to know more if you're willing to share." She exhaled a breathy sound. "My kind, we are known for our singing. It's not a mere entertainment. It's an art woven from our emotions, from the resonance of our souls, if you will. The frequencies emitted by our vocal cords can affect the nervous systems of certain species, humans included, stirring powerful feelings of euphoria or despair, depending on the singer's intent. On my world, it's used to unite people, to bring harmony." She paused, her gaze distant. But in the wrong hands, that gift could become a weapon. Carter's mind flickered with the memory of unscrupulous generals from the war, those who would stop at nothing to gain an advantage over their enemies. He could see why certain criminal elements might see Selara as an asset to be exploited. "I won't let that happen," he said quietly, but firmly. Selara's eyes lingered on him, as though appraising his sincerity. Then she turned back to the window, letting the city lights dance across her features. Thank you, Carter Hayes. I hope you understand. I don't want to cause suffering, not even in my darkest nightmares. Of course, he said, stepping back. I'll let you rest now. Tomorrow, we can go over the security arrangements for Celestia Nova. She offered him a small bow. Good night, Mr. Hayes. He nodded and returned to the suite's entrance, where he found a comfortable chair in the foyer to keep watch. Though he had arranged for a separate room, the soldier in him refused to fully relax. Something about this job, this mysterious singer, her haunting voice, the swirling tension in the city, left him on edge. Yet, as he settled into that quiet vigil, he found his thoughts drifting back to Selara's luminous eyes. There was something about her that stirred a sense of protectiveness and intrigue deep within him, something more profound than merely a paid contract. He tried to shake it off. He was here to do a job, nothing more, but his heart whispered that he might be heading into unknown territory, where duty and desire would soon collide. Morning, if one could call it that, on Orion Prime, came in a slow unveiling of pastel-colored mists along the city's horizon. Carter woke from a light doze, body stiff from the night's vigil, and rubbed at his eyes. The suite was quiet, save for a faint hum from the ventilation system. Rising, he stretched, then moved to the large window where the city lay beneath him like an endless ocean of neon. He felt a presence behind him. Turning, he saw Selara in a flowing robe of shimmering, pale fabric. She inclined her head in greeting. You kept watch all night. Carter nodded. It's the job. Old habits die hard. You should rest, she said gently. I sense your weariness. He waved off her concern. I'm fine. We have a busy day ahead. We'll need to head over to the spaceport, check the shuttle to Celestia Nova, and scope out the station's security. Also, I'd like to see where you'll be performing. Selara came closer, her filaments swaying with each step. Your thoroughness is appreciated. Let me gather my things, and we can be on our way. Within the hour, they were en route to the city's orbital shuttle terminal, a vast structure with dome-shaped launch bays. The building teemed with travelers of countless species, each adorned in garments that symbolized their own worlds or cultural traditions. Announcements echoed through the vaulted corridors, accompanied by the clatter of luggage carts and the distant roar of engines preparing for takeoff. Carter maintained a vigilant watch, scanning the crowds for any sign of unusual interest in Selara. Although no direct threats were apparent, he still spotted a few too many eyes lingering on her luminescent features. Word of her presence had undoubtedly spread. Even in such a cosmopolitan nexus as Orion Prime, an alien of Selara's rare beauty and rumored abilities stood out. They boarded a sleek shuttle, its hull polished to a mirror finish, and settled into private seats behind tinted windows. Carter inspected the flight plan on a handheld console. Celestia Nova, a floating palace among the stars, orbited a nearby moon. It was famed for its indulgent retreats, opulent casinos, and top-tier entertainment. Corporate magnates, political figures, and wealthy tourists from all across the galaxy flocked there for rest, spectacle, and deals made behind velvet curtains. As the shuttle soared upward, leaving the planet's atmosphere, Selara gazed out at the stars. Carter watched her profile, seeing the faint reflection of the cosmos dancing in her large eyes. Her lips parted as though she might sing to them. He suppressed a sudden longing to hear her voice in its full splendor, but he reminded himself that her gift was a delicate matter, best saved for the performance itself. In due time, the shuttle docked with Celestia Nova. Carter ushered Selara through the gleaming corridors, lined with artworks that depicted dreamlike vistas. Every inch of the station exuded luxury. Gold filigree on the walls, elaborate sculptures that seemed to float in midair, staff dressed in immaculate uniforms, greeting arrivals with polished smiles. Holographic waterfalls cascaded from the ceiling, the sound of trickling water adding to the station's aura of opulence. Serrano awaited them just beyond customs, flanked by two of his personal guards. His face split into a practiced grin when he saw Selara, but he quickly turned to Carter, addressing him in hushed tones. I trust all went smoothly. Carter nodded. No issues so far. But the crowds at the terminal were interested. Serrano sniffed. That is to be expected. Come, I have arranged the best suite for you both. Then, We will tour the stage where Selara will perform. They traversed a sweeping hallway, eventually arriving at a pair of crystalline doors that slid open at their approach. Inside, the suite was extravagant in every sense. A plush lounge area with panoramic windows revealing the galaxy beyond, luxurious sleeping quarters, and a private refreshment bar stocked with drinks from multiple star systems. Selara, though accustomed to quiet simplicity, offered polite gratitude. She moved to the window, her gaze drifting over the starscape that shimmered like a velvet tapestry of jewels. While Serrano stepped out to handle administrative details, Carter walked the perimeter of the suite, inspecting every corner for hidden surveillance devices or potential vulnerabilities. Finding none, he turned to see Selara regarding him with curiosity. "Do you always work alone?" she asked softly. "I do," he replied. "Tend to keep things simple. Fewer moving parts that way." She nodded, but her eyes hinted at a deeper thought. "I sense a quiet longing in you," she said at last. "Forgive me for prying. It's part of my nature to feel the undercurrents of emotion around me." He stiffened. "You can feel what I'm thinking?" She shook her head gently. "Not precisely. I can sense your emotional state, at least a fraction of it. I don't intrude further. I wouldn't violate your privacy." Carter exhaled, running a hand through his short hair. "No offense taken. The war left a mark on me. Sometimes, the memories linger. I guess we all have scars." Selara lowered her gaze. "We do. My own kind have faced persecution across the galaxy. Our voices have been valued, but often feared. I understand what it means to carry wounds, even if they're not always visible." Carter studied her. "Well, you won't have to fear persecution here. Not while I'm on duty." A hint of warmth touched her eyes. "Thank you, Carter Hayes." He gave her a faint smile and tried to ignore the stirring in his chest, a subtle ache that told him he wanted to protect her for reasons beyond professional obligation. He quickly brushed that aside. He was here to do a job, and emotional entanglements with a client, especially an alien performer at the center of dangerous intrigue, would only complicate matters. But he couldn't entirely quell the quiet hum that resonated somewhere deep in his heart each time she looked at him. The feeling that perhaps they were both drifting souls in a galaxy filled with noise, each seeking a measure of solace in the other. The days passed in a flurry of rehearsals, security checks, and high-profile gatherings. Celestia Nova was a constant swirl of elegant patrons dressed in the finest materials, with every lounge and corridor brimming with conversation and commerce. Carter never left Selara's side, monitoring the staff who escorted her to the station's grand auditorium, an opulent chamber designed to hold thousands of spectators. The stage itself was massive, with a domed ceiling that displayed a breathtaking view of the stars outside. Perfect acoustics were promised by the station's state-of-the-art engineering, ensuring that Selara's voice would be heard in pristine clarity, regardless of where one sat. Selara's rehearsals were private, with only Carter and a handful of sound technicians present. When at last she sang out, her voice filled the empty auditorium, reverberating in waves that seemed to stir the very atoms of the air. Carter stood rooted to the spot, arms folded, but his heart pounding with a kind of reverent awe. The sorrow and hope intermingled in her melody, resonating through his chest and trailing goosebumps along his arms. He understood now how potent this gift could be. Even if she tried to restrain it, the emotional undertow was undeniable. After rehearsal, Selara would bow her head, as though carrying some exhaustion, and Carter would guide her gently back to her suite. Each time, she would offer a small, weary smile, silently thanking him for his steadfast presence. He found himself waking each day eager to see her again, to stand at her side, and ensure she faced no danger. That line between duty and genuine concern grew ever more blurred, and though he reminded himself that involvement beyond a professional contract could be perilous, his resolve wavered whenever she spoke his name, or when her luminous eyes found his across a crowded room. Then, on the second day, whispers began circulating among the station staff of unrecognized figures asking about Selara, men in dark clothing lurking near restricted corridors. Serrano's people assured Carter that everything was under control, but Carter's instincts told him otherwise. So one evening, he decided to investigate. While Selara rested in the suite, Carter slipped into the station's lower decks, a place where the luster and glamour gave way to more pragmatic infrastructure. Cargo bays. maintenance shafts, and deserted hallways lined with crates of supplies. It was in one such deserted corridor that Carter noticed a slight glow seeping from beneath a closed door, accompanied by hushed voices. Pressing himself against the wall, Carter edged closer, straining to listen. "If we managed to replicate her frequencies," came a voice, low and intense, "we could mesmerize entire crowds, turn them into puppets. The prophets alone." Another voice cut in. "Patience, Treelan. We haven't secured access to her yet. Serrano's dog is always by her side." Carter's eyes narrowed. They were talking about him, no doubt. He hadn't caught the name Treelan before, but the first voice seemed brimming with malevolence. Carter edged closer still, hoping to glean more intel. "But the job can be done," the second voice continued. "A short kidnapping. We record her voice, force her to demonstrate the entire range of frequencies. Then we can synthesize it with the new device. The guild will pay fortunes." Carter's stomach twisted. This was bigger than a simple attempt to control one performer. They intended to industrialize her ability, create a technology that weaponized her gift for profit. The voices continued in hushed tones, referencing a certain docking bay number, a potential abduction plan, and then footsteps drew closer to the door. He swiftly retreated into the shadows behind a stack of crates. Two men emerged, a tall, lanky figure with sunken cheeks and a shorter, muscular one. They slipped off down the corridor, completely unaware of Carter's presence. Once they were gone, Carter exhaled and hurried back up to the main levels, mind buzzing with alarm. A plan was in motion, one that threatened Selara's very freedom. He reached the suite, stepping inside to find Selara sitting by the panoramic window, lost in quiet reflection. She turned at the sound of his entrance, her face etched with concern. "Carter, what is it? I sense your worry." He locked the door behind him, checking the space to be sure they were alone. "We have trouble," he said, voice tight. "I overheard a conversation down in the maintenance decks. A group is planning to kidnap you, to force you to record your full vocal range so they can create a technology that replicates it. They mentioned synthetic manipulation, turning your gift into a commodity." Her expression went pale, the silver patterns on her skin fading slightly. "That is the greatest violation my people can imagine," she whispered. "Our song is sacred to us, not a weapon." Carter placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "They won't get near you," he promised. "But I need your cooperation. We can't trust station security entirely. Serrano may not have full control over who comes and goes. Tonight, we'll move you to a safer location on the station, a place only you, I, and maybe one or two of my trusted contacts know about. Then we'll figure out how to proceed." She nodded, her filaments trembling. "I trust you." Her words, quiet as they were, carried a potent weight. Carter felt the gravity of it as she gazed up at him, a flicker of hope mingling with fear. He gave a curt nod, steeling himself for what lay ahead. He had fought in wars among the stars, faced down troopers and mechs, endured sieges and betrayals. But something about this mission felt deeper, more personal. He would not let Selara fall into the clutches of those who sought to twist her gift. That night, under the guise of a simple sightseeing tour of Celestia Nova's underpublicized gardens, Carter led Selara through the station's labyrinth of corridors. He avoided main thoroughfares, deliberately weaving through back passages until they reached the dormant sector of the station, currently under renovation. One of Carter's old acquaintances, a maintenance supervisor named Hyan Morik, had granted him access to a neglected set of guest rooms that were off the official registry during the remodeling process. It was in one such dusty yet secure chamber that Carter guided Selara. Dim lights flickered as the doors slid shut behind them. The place smelled faintly of old carpets and stale air, but it was safe, at least for the moment. "I know it's not the suite you're accustomed to," Carter murmured, "but it's secure. I've rigged a basic alarm system. If anyone tries to breach the perimeter, we'll know immediately." Selara set her slender fingers on a nearby chair, her alien eyes scanning the room. "This is fine. Thank you. The opulence of that other suite was never my desire. This, at least, feels quieter." He nodded, and after double-checking the locks, turned to her. "Get some rest. I'll be outside, keeping watch." "You need rest as well," she said gently, stepping closer. "I can sense your tension, your exhaustion." "I'm fine," he insisted, but as he said it, he felt the sting of truth in her words. Sleep had been minimal ever since they arrived. The looming threat weighed on him like a leaden cloak. Yet he couldn't allow himself to slacken, not when her safety was at stake. Selara tilted her head, compassion filling her eyes. "Carter," she said softly, "will you let me sing for you just a little? It can ease your mind. I promise I will keep the effect subdued, so you're not overwhelmed." He hesitated. The idea of hearing her voice again was at once tempting and alarming, but something in her gentle plea chipped away at his defenses. At last, he nodded, stepping back to lean against the wall. Selara drew in a slow breath, closed her eyes, and parted her lips. The softest melody flowed into the stale air, like a distant lullaby carried on a gentle breeze. It wasn't the grand, resonating performance she unleashed in rehearsal, but a quieter, more personal song. It evoked the hush of twilight on a tranquil lake, the first glimmers of starlight overhead, and the sense of a burdensome day finally surrendering to rest. Carter felt his breathing slow, the tight knot in his chest loosening with each note. He closed his eyes, allowing the subtle currents of her voice to wash over him. Tension ebbed from his muscles, replaced by a gentle, comforting warmth. His thoughts, usually crowded with tactical concerns and worst-case scenarios, quieted. For a moment, he felt his mind drifting in that serene space, tethered only by the knowledge that Selara was near. As her voice trailed off, he opened his eyes to see her watching him. He paused, searching for words. "I've never felt so at peace." She lowered her gaze, a faint blush crossing her lavender cheeks. "I'm glad I could help. I promise I did not pry into your mind. Only offered a calming melody." He exhaled, pressing a hand over his heart. "Thank you." She offered a small nod, then stepped away to settle into one of the chairs. Carter lingered at the wall, fighting the urge to remain near her. Finally, he left the room, taking post in the corridor outside. But the lingering echoes of her song remained with him, like a gentle star that refused to dim, reassuring him in the darkness. The hours that followed brought trouble swiftly. Shortly before dawn cycle, the station's internal lighting dimmed to simulate nighttime. Carter, half dozing against the corridor wall, snapped awake at the faint beep of his improvised alarm. A sensor triggered near the main hallway. Someone was approaching. Hand on his sidearm, Carter tapped a button on his communicator. The small screen revealed two figures creeping through the corridor. They were armed with energy pistols and a small device that looked like a portable hacking tool. Carter's pulse quickened. He glanced at the closed door behind him, Selara's makeshift sanctuary. She was likely asleep. He quietly activated the secondary lock, ensuring that if things went south, the intruders wouldn't be able to breach the room easily. Taking a steadying breath, he stepped forward, drawing his pistol. The corridor was dimly lit by flickering overhead lights, casting elongated shadows. He saw the intruders, cloaked in dark attire, eyes hidden behind tinted goggles. They froze when they spotted him. Well, Carter said quietly. "You're a long way from the main thoroughfares." Lost. One intruder raised his weapon. Carter fired first, his shot precise, striking the man's shoulder. The intruder yelped, dropping to one knee. The second man lunged forward with surprising speed, returning fire. Carter ducked behind a structural pillar, the searing energy bolt zipping past his ear. The corridor erupted into a chaotic exchange, blasts scorching walls and ricocheting off metal surfaces. Carter kept his cool, methodically picking his shots. The second intruder darted behind a crate, rummaging for something in his belt pouch. Carter cursed under his breath, suspecting a grenade or a specialized device. Without hesitation, he advanced, weaving from cover to cover. In a sudden motion, the intruder lobbed a small sphere that emitted a deafening sonic pulse. Carter felt the reverberation slam into his eardrums, his vision dancing with spots of light. He staggered, disoriented, but forced himself to focus, to keep his weapon trained. A shot rang out. The second intruder had fired at him in his moment of weakness. Carter barely dodged, the bolt grazing his jacket. Gritting his teeth, he returned fire, striking the man squarely in the chest. The intruder collapsed with a strangled gasp. The first man, wounded, tried to flee, clutching at his injured shoulder. Carter quickly moved in, catching him before he could scramble away. Pinning him to the ground, Carter pressed his pistol to the man's head. "Who sent you?" The man spat out a curse. "You're too late, Hayes." The guild already knows where she is. Carter's eyes narrowed. The guild? Who are they exactly? Doesn't matter, the intruder snarled. You can't protect her forever. You can't stop what's coming. Carter considered him with cold fury. Then, a flicker of movement drew his attention. Selara had emerged from the room, her face anxious. Carter, are you all right? He whipped his gaze to her. Get back inside, lock the door. But the intruder, still pinned, managed a savage grin. With one hand, he fumbled for a device in his pocket. Carter realized too late. It was a small homing beacon, blinking red. The man activated it, presumably signaling others. With a low curse, Carter grabbed the beacon and crushed it underfoot, but the damage was likely done. Reinforcements would be on their way. Glaring at the intruder, Carter slammed the butt of his pistol into the man's temple, knocking him out cold. Then he turned to Selara, who stood trembling in the doorway. We have to go, Carter said, striding over and taking her by the arm. They found us. We need to leave this station, now. Her face showed both fear and resolve. Where can we go? Carter pressed his lips together. We'll find a ship. I know someone who might help. We can't stay here, not with the guild after you. She nodded, and Carter led her away, leaving the unconscious intruders behind. He sent a quick message to Hyan Morik, instructing him to call station security to secure the corridor. The entire plan for her performance, the carefully orchestrated show that had drawn so much attention, was now overshadowed by the imminent threat. Selara's life was at stake, and her gift was a prize criminals would kill to obtain. As they hurried through Celestia Nova's shimmering corridors, Carter couldn't help but shoot a glance at Selara. His heart pounded with more than just the adrenaline of combat. He felt something deeper, a fierce protectiveness, a determination not just to fulfill his contract, but to stand as her shield against all who threatened her. In those desperate moments, he realized that she had become more than just a client, more than just an exotic alien singer he was paid to guard. She had become the quiet, calming melody in his storm-riddled soul, and he would gladly face the entire galaxy to keep her safe. Their departure from Celestia Nova was orchestrated hastily. Through an old contact of Carter's, a grizzled pilot named Arkel, he secured a battered freighter. It was no luxury liner, but it would do. The engines roared to life in the station's docking bay as they prepared for an unscheduled launch. Alarms sounded, not specifically for them, but to announce that unauthorized flight plans would be met with immediate interception if no official clearance was granted. Carter sat in the co-pilot's seat, double-checking the thrusters and scanning for pursuers. Selara, seated behind them, clutched the armrests, her face pale. Arkel, with his wild salt and pepper beard and cybernetic eye, hammered the controls and cursed under his breath. We'll make it out, but the station authority might not be happy about this. You sure you want to do this, Hayes? Just get us out of here, Carter said, teeth clenched. We have no choice. The engines roared, and the freighter shuddered, then lifted off the hangar floor. A heavy clang announced their departure from the docking clamps. Carter caught a glimpse of station guards rushing into view, but it was too late. They were airborne. The freighter soared through the bay's force field doors and into open space. Instantly, the overhead console lit up with warning lights, indicating a fighter squadron had been scrambled to intercept them. Hang on, Arkel muttered, pushing the throttle to full. The freighter lurched forward, engines at maximum burn, leaving Celestia Nova behind as a gleaming speck against the curved horizon of the nearby moon. Carter keyed in the coordinates for a nearby jump gate, a stable wormhole that linked this sector to the ungoverned outer territories. If we can reach the gate, we can vanish. The guild will have a harder time tracking us out there. Arkel nodded. Brace yourselves. We've got hostiles on our 6. Sure enough, a pair of sleek starfighters swooped in, lasers flashing. The freighter shook under the impact of near-miss blasts, but Arkel zigzagged expertly, evading the worst of them. Carter cursed, manning a rear turret station to provide some covering fire. The turret was old and sluggish, but he managed to squeeze off a few shots, forcing the fighters to pull back, giving Arkel precious seconds to angle the freighter toward the jump gate. Selara clung to her seat, her filaments glowing in alarm. She said nothing, but the tension in her posture told Carter she felt every jolt and shudder of the craft. He spared her a quick glance over his shoulder, offering what he hoped was a reassuring look. Just a little more, he shouted above the roar of the engines. Then we'll be free. The jump gate loomed ahead, a massive ring structure bristling with technological conduits, swirling with energy that crackled a brilliant blue in the heart of the ring. Arkell locked onto it, aligning the freighter's trajectory. The pursuing fighters closed in, peppering their shields with bursts of plasma. Carter's turret spat fire in return, a cat-and-mouse game at deadly speed. Then, with a sudden surge, they crossed into the gate's event horizon. The world outside fragmented into swirling colors and streaking lights, as though they had plunged into a cosmic whirlpool. Gravity skewed for a breathless moment, and then the freighter erupted on the other side into open space, far from Celestia Nova and its waiting warships. Carter exhaled, relief washing over him like a tide. They had made it, though the danger was far from gone. The guild was clearly resourceful, and they might already be working to track their route. Still, for the moment, they were free. Arkell set a course for a nearby system known for its scattered asteroid belts and lawless refueling stations. "We can lose ourselves out here," he said, wiping sweat from his forehead. "But you best have some credits for me, Hayes. I don't do charity work." Carter nodded and passed him a small data chit. "There's enough on there to compensate you. We'll figure out the rest once we find a place to lay low." Arkell grunted in approval, redirecting the ship. Carter then turned to Selara, who still looked shaken. He moved to kneel beside her seat. "You all right?" She swallowed, nodding faintly. "Yes, I've never experienced anything like that." Her eyes brimmed with a quiet gratitude, and Carter took her hand gently. "We'll get through this. I promise." In that moment, they heard a beep from the ship's comm system. Carter rose, stepping over to the console. An incoming message displayed static-riddled text. "Unknown vessel. Surrender immediately. We have a lock on your position." Arkell cursed. "They must have a tracker on us. Or a damn good sensor net." Carter's jaw tightened. The message was followed by coordinates that indicated an approaching cruiser from the starboard side. The guild had wasted no time. A larger ship would be bearing down on them, presumably to capture or destroy them. Selara stood, her voice trembling. "We can't keep running, can we?" Carter pursed his lips. "We can try to outrun them again, but if they have more resources, we'll be chased indefinitely. We need a plan." Arkell glanced over his shoulder. "I know a place, an asteroid base run by a friend of mine, name's Ralvex. It's hidden off standard charts, used by independent miners. We might hide there, maybe even disable any trackers they planted." "Then let's do it," Carter said firmly. Arkell keyed the navigational data, and the freighter angled toward a distant cluster of jagged, tumbling rocks in the blackness of space. The tension in the cockpit was palpable. Carter kept an eye on the sensors, noting how the approaching cruiser steadily gained ground, though it remained at a moderate distance. Minutes felt like hours as they threaded through the chaotic field of drifting asteroids. Some were the size of small moons, others no bigger than a cargo crate, each one a deadly obstacle if struck at high speed. Arkell proved his piloting prowess, weaving deftly among the debris, using the space rocks as cover. The cruiser tried to follow, but the risky maneuvering forced it to slow. Laser fire occasionally lanced out, but the scattered field provided plenty of hiding spots. Carter guided Arkell with sensor data, ensuring no collisions, while Selara huddled in the corner, arms wrapped around herself, silent and wide-eyed. At last, they neared a massive asteroid riddled with artificial tunnels and glowing lights. A pair of large doors in the rock swung open, revealing a hidden hangar. Arkell slipped the freighter inside, the rock's enormous gates shutting behind them like the maw of an ancient beast. They landed with a heavy thud, the engines powering down. Carter rushed to the main hatch, scanning for any immediate threats. The hangar was small, lit by dim yellow floodlights. A handful of workers in grubby overalls stood off to the side, eyes narrowed in suspicion. Then one of them stepped forward, removing goggles to reveal a grizzled face with a broad grin. "Arkell, you old scoundrel," he called, voice echoing across the hangar. "What brings you here? I thought you were done with these parts." Arkell emerged behind Carter, chuckling. "Desperate times, Ralvex. Need a place to hole up, lay low." Ralvex's gaze shifted to Carter, then to Selara, who now stepped out cautiously. Her alien features caught his attention at once, but he simply shrugged. "No judgments here. You can keep your secrets as long as you don't bring trouble down on my head." Carter approached, arms raised in a placating gesture. "We might have trouble following us, but we'll pay you for the inconvenience." Ralvex eyed him, then spat on the floor. "Credits help, sure, but I value my life more. So if a cruiser comes knocking, you better be ready to fight or run." Carter nodded. "Fair enough. Just let us stay long enough to get rid of any tracker, maybe stock up on supplies, and plan our next move." Ralvex grunted in agreement, motioning them deeper into the base. "Follow me. We've got a couple of empty storage rooms you can use. I'll have one of my techs sweep your ship for trackers." Carter and Selara exchanged a quick glance. Relief mingled with lingering worry, but they had no other choice. They followed Ralvex into the labyrinth of the asteroid facility, uncertain of what lay ahead, but determined not to give in. For Carter, one thing was crystal clear. He was in far deeper than he ever imagined, and every new twist in this desperate flight only made him more fiercely determined to protect the alien Songstress who had captured not just his loyalty, but perhaps his heart. Over the next 2 days, Carter and Selara stayed hidden in Ralvex's asteroid outpost. The base was a ramshackle collection of tunnels and makeshift habitats carved into the rock. Mining equipment lay scattered in corners, half-rusted, and the entire place smelled of grease and stale air. Yet it was out of the guild's immediate reach, and that alone made it a sanctuary. Ralvex's techs did indeed find a tracer beacon cunningly attached to the freighter's hull, a palm-sized disc hidden under a thin panel near the engines. Carter destroyed it, cursing the complexity of the device. Meanwhile, Arkell busied himself with minor repairs, cursing under his breath that the chase had taxed the freighter's drives more than expected. Selara kept mostly to the small quarters they were assigned, worried that her presence would draw undue curiosity from the miners. On the rare occasions she ventured out, Carter walked with her, hand hovering near his sidearm. He could sense the stares they received, some from simple curiosity at her exotic looks, others from suspicion. The base had no illusions of safety or morality, and if the guild offered a high enough bounty, anyone might try to turn her in. During these tense days, Carter and Selara spoke often in hushed tones. She told him of her people's history, how they revered harmony and avoided conflict, how their voices were considered gifts of empathy rather than tools of manipulation. In turn, Carter shared fragments of his past, the battles he'd fought, the friends he'd lost, and the lingering nightmares that haunted him. Their discussions were fraught with vulnerability, yet formed a bond that was increasingly hard to ignore. One evening, as the station's artificial lighting dimmed to mimic night, Carter found Selara in the corridor outside her quarters, gazing at a small viewport. Beyond the thick glass, the asteroid's surface stretched in a panorama of jagged stone, with distant stars peeking between drifting shards of cosmic debris. Selara looked weary, the glow of her filaments dimmer than usual. He approached quietly. "Couldn't sleep?" She shook her head, not turning around. "My performance was supposed to be tomorrow. Back on Celestia Nova, thousands of people were waiting to hear me. Instead, here I am, hiding on a rock." Carter swallowed. "I'm sorry it came to this." She sighed softly. "You have nothing to apologize for. If not for you, I'd likely be in the hands of those who would misuse my voice. Yet, I can't help but mourn what's been lost." She paused, then turned to him, her eyes reflecting the starlight. "Carter, do you think I'll ever be safe again? Will I always have to run?" He searched her face, the delicate patterns on her cheeks, the subtle trembling of her lower lip. Slowly, he reached out to place a comforting hand on her shoulder. "We'll find a way. There must be a place out there where you can live freely, where your gift isn't something to be exploited." She lowered her gaze. "Sometimes, I wish I could just stay with you, no matter where that path leads." The simple admission caught Carter off guard. His heart thumped against his ribs. He opened his mouth to speak, but found himself momentarily lost for words. You trust me that much?" he finally managed. Her eyes lifted to his, shimmering with an unspoken depth of feeling. "I do. You've proven your kindness, your courage. And there's a quiet strength in you that calms me." He gently squeezed her shoulder. "I'm just doing my job." She offered a small smile tinged with sorrow. "Your job, yes. But I sense it's more than that." He closed his eyes briefly, exhaling. In that moment, he wanted to confess that he, too, felt drawn to her in a way he hadn't expected, that her presence ignited a spark of hope he hadn't felt in years. But the weight of practicality bore down on him. They were hunted, and attachments only complicated the mission. Still, some part of him rebelled against that logic, longing to embrace what was blossoming between them, no matter how precarious. Selara, he began softly, stepping closer, so they stood mere inches apart. I'll see you safe, no matter what. You have my word. She placed a hand lightly against his chest, right where his heart beat faster. For a moment, they stood there, enveloped in the silent hum of the bass. The moment lingered, unspoken confessions dancing in the space between them. Then, a shrill alarm cut through the corridor, shattering the stillness. Red lights flashed, accompanied by frantic shouting echoing from the distant tunnels. Carter tensed, turning sharply toward the noise. Selara withdrew her hand, her eyes wide with sudden fear. Moments later, Ralvex's voice crackled over the base-wide intercom. All hands, we've got incoming. Unidentified ships in the sector. Man the turrets. Carter and Selara exchanged a single glance of mutual understanding before rushing down the corridor. They emerged into the main hangar, where Arkell was hastily running system checks on the freighter. Ralvex stood near a console, scanning sensor data. He looked pale, even under the flickering red alarms. What is it? Carter barked. Looks like a small fleet, Ralvex replied grimly. At least 3 ships, probably more behind them. They're broadcasting no official ID, so we're guessing pirates or mercs. But my gut tells me they're your friends, the guild. Carter cursed. How the hell did they find us so quickly? We destroyed the tracer. Ralvex shook his head. No idea. Maybe they're just scanning every rock in the sector. Maybe they got connections you can't imagine. Either way, they're on top of us. Selara clenched her hands. We must leave. Leave? Ralvex repeated incredulously. That fleet will shoot you down the second you poke your nose outside. Not to mention, they'll likely blow this base if I don't hand you over. Carter glanced around. We can't let that happen. There must be some way to fight back, or at least buy time to escape. Raising an eyebrow, Ralvex chewed his lip. We have some defensive turrets, but they're old. Not sure we can hold off an entire fleet. Our best chance is to run and hope the asteroid's thick enough to mask our exit if we cause a distraction. Arkell let out a frustrated huff. We can only outrun them if we have a head start. But how do we get that? Carter set his jaw, his mind racing with half-formed ideas. Then his gaze landed on Selara. He recalled the effect her voice had on an audience, how it could enthrall them, or sow confusion or even despair if she willed it. But the thought of using her gift so directly in a conflict made him uneasy. She had told him she never wanted to weaponize her voice, never wanted to cause harm. Yet the alternative was unthinkable. The guild would capture her, enslave her talents, and possibly massacre everyone at the base. He turned to her, his face laced with regret. Selara, I have an idea. If you sing, one that can be broadcast on a wide frequency, boosted by the base's comma rays, you might be able to disorient the guild's pilots, or at least confuse them long enough for us to slip away. Her eyes widened with alarm. I can do that, but it goes against everything I stand for, Carter. I can't use my song to harm. He placed a steadying hand on her shoulder. I know, but we don't have many options. You wouldn't be aiming to kill them, just to throw them off. It's the only way to protect everyone here. She closed her eyes, trembling. All right, if it's the only way, but I will try to minimize the harm. He nodded, heart heavy. I promise you, once we're out of danger, I'll do everything in my power to find you a safe place where you never have to do this again. Turning to Ralvex, Carter barked orders. Patch Selara's microphone into your main communications array. Set it to a wide broadcast, with a focus on short-range channels the enemy ships will be using. Ralvex grimaced. You're the boss, for now. Let's hope this works. Within minutes, Selara stood before a makeshift microphone rig, cables snaking across the floor, the base's battered comm console flickering with feedback. On a screen, Carter and Ralvex watched as sensor blips of the enemy ships crept closer. Outside the base, roving lights from their craft swept across the asteroid's surface, searching for hidden doors or illusions. Carter gave Selara a nod. When I signal, start singing. We'll be launching at the same time, so hopefully they won't detect the hangar opening in the confusion. She swallowed, lifting her hands as though they were the only barrier shielding her from guilt. Then, with a breath, she began. At first, The station's audio system carried only a faint hush, but then her song rose. It was haunting, ethereal, a lament that shimmered with sorrow, weaving threads of longing and regret. On the sensor display, the enemy ships faltered, their maneuvers slowing as though ensnared by an invisible tide. Ralvex's eyes widened. Damn, it's actually working. Carter let a small smile touch his face. Get to the ship, he told Arkel, and power up. We go now. Arkel sprinted toward the freighter. Selara, eyes closed, continued to sing, channeling her voice into the console. Carter stood beside her, touched by both awe and guilt, wishing she never had to bear this burden. At last, with a gentle hand on her shoulder, he whispered, "Now." She opened her eyes, tears brimming. The broadcast ended as Carter guided her away from the console. They ran through the corridors to the hangar. With a mechanical groan, the massive doors parted. The freighter hovered inside, ramp extended. Carter and Selara boarded, and Ralvex waved them off from the ground. "Go," Carter shouted to Arkel. The engines roared, and the freighter surged through the hangar doors, out into the star-speckled void. They found the guild ships drifting in scattered formation, their lights flickering erratically. Pilots must have been reeling from the sonic broadcast, struggling to regain composure. The freighter maneuvered around them, slipping through the confusion. One or two shots fired wildly, but none hit their target. In moments, they were clear. Selara collapsed into a seat, gasping, her filaments dull. Carter knelt beside her, taking her hands in his. She gazed at him with tearful eyes. "I felt their minds recoil," she whispered brokenly. "I never wanted to inflict fear like that." His heart twisted. "You saved all of us, Selara. You saved yourself. Don't blame yourself for using your gift in defense." She managed a weak nod, her tears spilling silently. Carter held her close, feeling an unspoken bond tighten around them, shaped by the trials they had endured together. Up in the cockpit, Arkel charted a course away from the asteroid, away from the guild's scattered ships, forging deeper into the ungoverned sectors. The swirling cosmos beyond the viewport felt both vast and lonely. But within the freighter's cramped hull, Carter sensed a fragile hope taking root, a belief that perhaps, if they kept running, they might find a corner of the galaxy where Selara's voice could be cherished, not exploited, and where two weary souls could finally find peace in each other's presence. Days stretched into a weary routine aboard the freighter as they traveled from one uncharted jump point to another. The guild's pursuit had thinned, though Carter and Arkel remained vigilant, scanning for any sign of a tail. They kept their destination flexible, sometimes changing course mid-transit to throw off potential trackers. Selara rarely sang now, save for the soft lullabies she offered Carter when insomnia's claws raked him. Each time, the stress in his chest eased, leaving him floating in a gentle hush. Yet he could see the toll it took on her spirit, the guilt that lingered over using her gift as a weapon. He tried to reassure her that she'd done what was necessary, but the memory clung to her like a stubborn shadow. One evening, with the stars shining through the cockpit window and the freighter's engines humming faintly, Carter found Selara in the cargo bay. She was seated on a crate, gazing at the swirling patterns of cosmic dust visible through a small porthole. She looked lost in thought. He approached quietly. "Selara." She turned. "Carter, I'm sorry. Did you need me for something?" He shook his head, sitting beside her. "Just wanted to see how you're holding up." He hesitated, then added gently, "And I wanted to talk about the future." Her filaments flickered. The future, a concept that feels so distant right now. Carter nodded, rubbing the back of his neck. "I know, but I've been thinking." Arkel mentioned a remote planet called Ira's Rest. It's on the fringes of known space, mostly inhabited by small farming communities and a few researchers. No major corporate presence, no big trade routes. It might be a place we can vanish. She studied his face. "And what would we do there?" "Live as fugitives." He exhaled. "Not fugitives. Just quietly. We could settle, or at least hide out for a while, until the guild loses our trail. They're powerful, but they have bigger fish to fry than chasing us to the ends of the galaxy if we're not easy pickings." Selara lowered her gaze. "My performance, my dream, is it gone then? Am I doomed to remain a ghost on the edges of civilization?" Carter's voice softened. "You're free to sing if you want, perhaps to a smaller crowd, or even just for yourself. I'm not asking you to abandon your gift, but you can't go back to the big stages for now. We have to be realistic." She closed her eyes, absorbing that painful truth. When she opened them, he saw acceptance mixed with sadness. "All right, if that is what it takes to be safe. And you will stay with me?" A gentle warmth bloomed in his chest. He took her hand, giving it a tender squeeze. "If you'll have me. I'm no musician, but I can protect you. And I'd like to learn what life can be when it's not spent looking over our shoulders every second." She laced her slender fingers through his, filaments flickering more brightly. "Then yes, Carter Hayes, I want you at my side." They sat like that for a time, fingers entwined, souls intertwined. Silence surrounded them, yet it felt like the quiet calm before dawn, rather than the hush of despair. For the first time and longer than he cared to remember, Carter felt as though he was laying down a sword he had carried all his life, choosing a gentle path instead of endless conflict. Within another week, they reached the outskirts of Ayara's Rest. The planet was a lush orb of emerald and turquoise, ringed by faint wisps of white clouds. Fewer than 10,000 people lived there, scattered across remote settlements. The planet's rotational cycle aligned closely with standard galactic time, offering a comfortable rhythm of day and night. Arkell brought the freighter down in a wide meadow near a cluster of modest buildings, wood and stone dwellings, powered by a modest solar grid. The locals, human and a few other species, watched the landing with mild curiosity, but no hostility. A tall, broad-shouldered woman stepped forward, introducing herself as Rowena, one of the settlement's unofficial leaders. Carter spoke with her, explaining they were travelers seeking a peaceful place to stay. Rowena's sharp eyes took in Selara's alien features, but showed no fear, only a calm acceptance. "We don't turn people away here, as long as they don't bring trouble." Carter glanced at Selara, relief evident on his face. "Thank you. We'll do our best to blend in, earn our keep." Arkell, who had grown fond of the pair despite his gruff exterior, decided to remain on Ayara's Rest for a short time to overhaul the freighter's engines. Then he intended to move on, as was his way. He winked at Carter before leaving. "You two take care. I'll spread some false leads if the guild starts sniffing around." Carter thanked him. Then, with a final handshake and a pat on the shoulder, Arkell departed, leaving Carter and Selara gazing out at their new home. Their first nights on Ayara's Rest were spent in a small, single-story cottage on the settlement's edge, lent to them by Rowena. It was simple: 2 rooms, a little kitchen, and wide windows that opened onto rolling fields of tall grass. At dusk, fireflies sparkled like living stars among the wildflowers. For Selara, used to the clamor of interstellar hubs, it felt like a dream. She stood on the cottage's porch, letting the soft wind caress her face, breathing in air free of smog and neon glare. Carter joined her, leaning on the railing. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" She nodded, a subtle smile curving her lips. "I never imagined I would find such tranquility in a human settlement." A comfortable silence settled between them. Then Selara asked, "Are you content here, Carter?" He considered her question, gazing out at the twilight sky. "I think I might be," he replied softly. "For once in my life, I'm not bracing for the next battle, and I don't feel restless like I did when the war ended. It's different." Selara turned to face him. "I'm glad," she said simply, and in her eyes, he saw a reflection of that same gentle warmth he felt in his own chest. Over the next weeks, they found a rhythm. Carter helped the settlement residents with manual labor, hauling supplies, fixing broken fences, learning rudimentary farming. Selara aided in a small communal school, teaching the children about music and the wonders of the cosmos beyond their humble planet. She was careful never to sing at full force, though her humming alone was enough to enchant wide-eyed students. In these simple tasks, they discovered a kind of fulfillment neither had tasted before. At first, the townsfolk remained somewhat cautious around Selara's exotic appearance, but her kindness and soft-spoken nature soon won them over. They learned to appreciate her glowing filaments as a sign of her gentle heart, not a threat. Carter's protective presence underscored that no one should trouble her, though there was rarely any conflict on Ayara's Rest. Life was too slow, too interdependent, for malice to thrive. Inevitably, there were nights when Carter jolted awake from old-worn nightmares, chest tight, sweat beading his brow. But Selara would soothe him with soft songs, her voice weaving a tapestry of calm. Each time, he'd sink back into rest, feeling safer than he ever had. That closeness gave rise to a new kind of bond. During quiet evenings, they would share a humble meal, exchanging gentle smiles. Sometimes they walked hand in hand along the wooded paths, the moonlight casting silver rays on their faces. Conversations drifted from the mundane details of farm life to the deeper yearnings of the soul. Slowly, almost shyly, they embraced the affection that had sparked between them since their perilous journey began. One crisp morning, Selara stood by a pond on the settlement's outskirts. The water reflected her lavender skin and shimmering filaments. Carter approached, noticing she wore a simple dress woven by the local seamstress, a far cry from the extravagant outfits of Orion Prime. Yet she looked regal in its simplicity. He stepped behind her, placing a gentle hand on her waist. She turned, smiling. "Good morning, Carter." He leaned in, pressing a light kiss to her forehead. "Morning." He paused, inhaling the fresh scents of dew and wildflowers. "I was thinking, the people here have been good to us. We could stay long-term, but I want to be sure that's what you want. You once dreamed of performing to vast audiences." She lowered her gaze, the pond rippling softly at her feet. "I did," she admitted. "But after everything that happened, I learned how dangerous it can be for me to be in the spotlight. And there is a quiet joy in sharing my voice with those who truly appreciate it, even if it's just a handful of school children here in the settlement." She looked up, meeting his gaze. "And you? I can sing for you always." His chest tightened with emotion. "You amaze me, you know that? You've given up so much." She shook her head softly, filaments swaying. "I've gained something far more precious." They shared a tender smile, and Carter felt his heart flutter, as though the cosmos themselves thrummed in unison with their closeness. With gentle fingers, he tilted her chin upward, and they kissed, a meeting of souls beneath the softly glowing sunrise. In that single moment, he knew that everything, every chase, every narrow escape, every sleepless vigil, had led to this new beginning. Selara, once a distant star in a galaxy of chaos, had become his cherished companion, and he her steadfast guardian. They had forged a refuge on this quiet planet, free from the neon spires and shadowy threats. Perhaps the guild still lurked somewhere out in the stars, but here and now, they found peace. Months passed without a single sign of pursuit. The guild, it seemed, had turned its gaze elsewhere, concluding that chasing an elusive singer into the fringes of space was more trouble than it was worth. Life on Iara's rest settled into a gentle routine. Carter and Selara established a modest home of their own, near a grove of flowering trees that filled the air with sweet fragrance each spring. Carter worked the fields alongside the locals, his once battle-scarred arms now toned from honest labor rather than violence. Selara's glow brightened with each passing day, her health returning fully now that she no longer lived in constant fear. At times, Carter would come home to find her softly singing to herself, weaving delicate melodies that echoed through the small cottage, and his heart would swell with gratitude for what they had built together. Eventually, word spread quietly among the settlement that Selara's voice held uncommon beauty, though none suspected its true power. Friends began stopping by the cottage, asking if Selara would grace them with a gentle song, particularly on days of celebration or nights of mourning. She obliged, and her compassionate performances wove the community closer. Neighbors brought fresh produce, seeds, or handmade gifts in thanks. During one such evening, when a new barn had been completed and the villagers gathered to celebrate, Selara stood in the open air, stars twinkling overhead. Carter was nearby, leaning against a post, arms folded casually as he watched her. She cleared her throat, her filaments pulsing softly, and began to sing. Unlike the grand, high-stakes performances she once aimed for, this was intimate and heartfelt. Her voice lifted into the mild breeze, carrying hope, gratitude, and friendship. The children laughed, old men wiped away tears, and the farmers clasped hands with their loved ones, swaying gently to the music. Carter felt a lump in his throat, recalling how that very gift had nearly been stolen by profiteering criminals. Now, instead of sowing chaos, it brought people together in a moment of pure harmony. When she finished, the crowd clapped and cheered, beaming at her. Selara bowed her head, a bit shy from the attention, but the warmth in her eyes spoke volumes. Carter reached her side, placing a protective arm around her shoulders. "Beautiful," he whispered, pressing a kiss to her temple. She glowed in response. "I'm happy, Carter. More than I ever thought possible." He gazed at her, unable to hide his own grin. "Me too." The barn dance continued late into the night, filled with laughter and camaraderie. In the soft glow of lanterns, Carter and Selara joined the festivities, dancing in each other's arms with a gentle sway. For all the uncertainties that had plagued them, for all the dangers that still might lurk beyond the horizon, this moment felt like the culmination of their journey. As the music died down and families drifted back to their homes, Carter and Selara walked through the moonlit fields to their cottage. Crickets chirped in the tall grass, and the gentle hum of nocturnal life resonated around them. When they reached their porch, Carter paused, turning to face Selara in the silver light. "I know we never got to make big declarations before," he murmured, voice low, "but I need to say this. Selara, I love you. Not just as someone I swore to protect, but as a partner, a companion. You're everything to me." She blinked, tears of joy glistening in her starlit eyes. "Carter Hayes," she whispered, "I love you too. From the moment your steadfast heart shielded me from the threats of the galaxy, you became a part of my song. I can't imagine a life without you." Their lips met in a tender kiss, sealed by the hush of the night wind. The longing and fear that once haunted them seemed to dissolve, replaced by a quiet certainty that they had found their place in each other's embrace. That night, they lay together in the soft glow of the moon, their hands intertwined, whispering dreams of the simple life they'd continue building. No longer star-crossed traveler and alien starlet on the run, they were simply two souls who had discovered a shared peace amidst the cosmic tumult. Thus, under the serene sky of Ayara's rest, an ex-soldier and an alien songstress found something elusive and rare, a peaceful haven where their bond could deepen without the shadow of fear. The settlement grew to respect and adore Selara, not just for her gifts, but for her kindness. And they admired Carter for his dedication, seeing in him a man who had laid aside his weapons to nurture the life he loved. When children asked for stories, Carter would sometimes recount softened tales of the war he survived, but more often, he spoke of how he met Selara. He narrated it like a fable, the soldier hired to protect a beautiful songstress on a shining station, the threat of villains who wished to exploit her wondrous voice, the daring escape across the stars, and finally, the haven found in this quiet corner of the galaxy. He always ended the tale with a gentle smile, looking at Selara, who would softly hum a verse that made every heart in the room swell. In these shared moments, they showed that even in a universe teeming with danger and strife, hope could bloom like a rare flower, nourished by unwavering devotion and the kind of love that transcended worlds. So it was that Carter Hayes and Selara, the alien singer, forged their own destiny, no longer haunted by the neon ghosts of Orion Prime, nor the gleaming spires of Celestia Nova, nor the lurking menace of the Guild. Their days were filled with the pleasant hum of daily chores, with songs that lifted weary spirits, and with the steady warmth of affection that guided them through the changing seasons. And in the end, though the galaxy stretched on in its infinite vastness, filled with ancient mysteries and ever-present perils, their story found a happily ever after. For in each other's arms, they had discovered what neither had ever known, a sanctuary where their hearts could safely beat in harmony, forever accompanied by the gentle music of love.